Well, hello everyone. Welcome to today's Forward Together webinar that's led by Andrea Reyes and Samir Gupte from Samiracles. At the webinar today, they'll be sharing how We Are Duval, an initiative to teach the officers at Jacksonville Sheriff's Office about the city's diversity, came about and the changes that were brought city and countywide. My name is Sayan, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. I'm also director of the Learn, Share, and Change project that includes this webinar series. In addition to webinar series that's running until August 14th, we're also conducting a statewide online survey to develop long-term goals and strategies to make Florida more inclusive and immigrant-friendly for everybody. Please check out our website at weavetails.org/forward-together for more information. Now, we're going to start by introducing our two wonderful speakers that we have today. They will be sharing more about their work and background on their own. Andrea is the owner and immigration lawyer at Reyes Legal based in Jacksonville, Florida. And Samir is a chief change officer at Samiracles. If you guys have any questions for Andrea or Samir during the webinar, you can leave them in the chat, in the Q&A chat, and we'll try to have them answered by the speaker. And also, if you, for some reason, if you get kicked out of the Zoom meeting, you can always log back on using the same Zoom link. All right, so Samir and Andrea, you guys ready?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sayan. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a little afternoon, so I can say that. We love that you've all taken the time to be with us today. I'm going to start with a video, so I'm going to flip over to sharing my screen. You won't hear the sound on this video. There isn't any dialogue. There is ominous music, and you were sent the video in advance, and then we'll talk about the video in just a sec. So this is the video that we use to start out the We Are Duval program. And every time I see it, it makes me smile and chuckle. And that's a big part of the reason we try to do that. So imagine you're a cadet, you've just joined JSO, you're within your first or second day, you've seen agenda, Melissa Nelson, the state attorney's coming to talk to you, Mike Williams, the sheriff, Pat Ivey, the undersheriff. So you get this long list of recognizable names and topics, and then you see this thing called We Are Duval, and that's all it says on your schedule. And in strides 4 people who aren't police officers. There's a 5'8", 165 dark-skinned person with short hair, so that's me, of unidentifiable ethnic origin, kind of casually dressed. Then there's this light-skinned woman with dark hair, probably some ethnicity, impeccably dressed with high heels, with a dynamic walk. Behind her is a tall, confident, well-dressed African-American woman. And then bringing up the rear is a kind of a hefty, blonde hair, blue-eyed white guy in a coat and tie and a big grin and smile. That's all you see. And so you're seeing this thing on the screen that says, "We Are Duval, Building Effective Relationships Across Jacksonville." Like, what in the blank are we in for? We use this video to, first off, disarm the audience so that their amygdala is calm and so that they're intrigued. It is kind of funny, but it also introduces a really important topic, the foundational topic for our program, that assumptions are part of the human experience. So we talk about and debrief what people saw when they walked in. They saw a bunch of burly, tank-topped, tattooed, some bald white guys with a couple of seats. And so immediately the brain is forcing the ticket holders to make some assumptions. So we talk about how assumptions have been with humanity for 20 to 30,000 years. While it's not an excuse, it's an explanation. And until we understand that, until we understand that the reptile or lizard part of our brain hasn't kept up with the changes in society, we can't overcome or change that. So that's like the fundamental theme of We Are Duval. So I wanted to share that with you. We wanted to share that with you up front because it's also a way to get the audience's attention. There's plenty of research that shows that whatever you do in the first 15 to 20 seconds of a presentation will make or break your presentation. So hopefully we're off to a good start. What we want to do is kind of share with you the context of We Are Duval, kind of how we got it up and running. We're going to high level cover the content because it is a 2-hour program and we don't have 2 hours. We'll talk about some tips for achieving impactful change, and then we want to leave time for questions. So hopefully that makes sense for questions. We're not going to take them during the presentation, but you can put them in the chat and we will try to answer as many as we can. And if we cannot get to all of them, if we can respond via email or whatever, we will certainly strive to do that. So it all began with a melee. And that was, if any of you were in Jacksonville or North Florida in April of 2017, you remember what happened at Hemmings Park. You remember there was a anti-Trump protest, and there was an instigator named Gary Snow that caused a lot of problems at the protest, and that the JSO officers did not arrest Gary Snow. They intervened, and they ultimately arrested what became known as the Hemmings Park Five. That became a major issue, conflagration within the Jacksonville community and society. So I was in a role serving as a community organizer for the ACLU of Florida for North Florida. I was tagged into some initial conversations with Sheriff Williams and his leadership team that included the undersheriff, the director of patrol, and the director of corrections. So over the course of a few months, we had some good dialogue with several community leaders. We were trying to zero in on some opportunities to make a change, to kind of seek to understand what happened. You know, it did feel a little bit like a slow no, but we really didn't ask for anything specific either, and we'll talk about that as we get further on. But the conversation continued from May to August to October. Somewhat in parallel, a group called the Women's March of Jacksonville decided to start a committee or a team to look at immigration issues in the Jacksonville area. And an amazing, dynamic woman named Mimi Dior took the lead on that and then tagged me in because of my ACLU hat to be her co-chair. So we started meeting with Sheriff Williams separately on that topic. So Sheriff Williams and I are starting to get to know each other. That's July of 2017. And again, we brought in some immigration attorneys who had specific examples of racial profiling from, amongst people that look like immigrants who may or may not have been professionals, that really doesn't matter. But, the sheriff was intrigued. So we continued that conversation. Ultimately, we used some of the ideas that I'm going to share with you later about how to achieve impactful change to actually get to do some training. And I'm going to pass it over to my co-presenter, Andrea, to take you through the first training session that we were asked or allowed to do.
Thanks, Samir. So we're very excited to be here and to share this program with you guys. We've been working on this since 2016, so it's been a really wonderful experience to see how conversations about community individuals that were concerned for their immigrant communities, how that developed into what it is today. So we had this lunch and learn. It was around January of 2018. So after talking to Sheriff Mike Williams for over a year about our concerns regarding anti-immigrant climate post the elections, the presidential elections, we were able to convince the sheriff to let us pilot a program to him and the JSO leadership with the purpose of helping JSO leadership better understand the immigrant experience in America and Florida, and specifically in the city of Jacksonville. And so Samir and I hosted our very first lunch and learn JSO. That was about 2.5 hours. And it was through these initial conversations of the lunch and learns that we're going to talk to you in a little bit about the program, We Are Duval, and how it was born. But so in those 2.5 hours, I think half hours was for lunch, but for the other 2 hours, Samir and I were up there talking our souls away. We started off with a very clear objective to let them know, to try to disarm them and let them know that we were here to teach, but also to listen. And then we started off with an icebreaker where we asked them to, tell us their name, and also if they could identify any background that they had in terms of heritage, if they knew of any heritage from their own family history. And we were pleasantly surprised that we had quite a few officers who, had origins from Europe, from the Middle East. So that they were also surprised to see how many individuals actually, had immigrant families. So that kind of leveled the playing field a little bit to start off with. Afterwards, Samir, I think we did, you want to pull the slide? I think we did the 5-minute bill. We asked them to create an immigration reform bill, because in that time, immigration reform was a very hot topic, and you hear it, but you don't understand what it takes. And so we gave them notepads and pens, and we put them in groups of 5, and we put them on a timer, and they had to make a list of all the things that they would do to help improve the immigration system, the broken immigration system. And also, we were pleasantly surprised when not all of them were like, deport them all. They actually had some meaningful solutions, like employment, for the DACA students, for the DACA recipients, to give them pathways to fix the border, right? There was all these really great, it was a great dialogue between them. And then we were, like I said, surprised that they weren't all like, we're going to go ahead and deport them all. That wasn't the solution for them. And let me see here. Yeah. So then we kind of explained to them, who is Jacksonville? Like, what is the community that they're serving? We found that it would be beneficial for them to understand just like the actual demographics of the immigrant community that they were serving, because it's not very common that Jacksonville has a huge Burmese population or a Filipino population. And so we thought that we would break that down for them. And they were also pleasantly surprised to see how diverse Jacksonville was. So I think we have some pictures here. Oh, yes, this is my favorite part. We actually, to make it more personal to the JSO officers, we had pre-recorded these 4 very specific immigrants and refugees. We had them do a 1-minute voice recording, and then we played it, we organized it on the PowerPoint, and then we played it for them. One was a refugee from Iraq, and all the things that she has done here in the community for the state of Florida and for Jacksonville. Another one was a student who came here as an international student, had to go through the very lengthy process and what that looked like for her in order to get her green card. An undocumented immigrant who had been here over 10 years without lawful status, and then obtained his immigration status, and now the impact that he has as a business owner. And then we also shared the story of a Cuban nurse refugee. And so that was very, they were interested, and they asked questions about the undocumented immigrant and did he pay taxes? And so they were listening, they were engaged during these recordings. So I think, yeah, here are some pictures where they were doing the, write the bill, us presenting, Samir and I, during our first presentation ever. And then at the end, we got very positive feedback. The sheriff was really impressed. And as a result of this specific presentation, Samir and him continued engaging in much more concise conversations about improving the program. Samir?
Yep. So shortly thereafter, I was able to get a one-on-one meeting with the sheriff, and I have a bizarre background, but it includes about 26 years in corporate America and building teams and cultures. And so I shared with him some suggestions from attracting new cadets, the hiring process, the selection process, onboarding, training, etc. And, he was actually already considering a number of them, but there was one that really piqued his interest, and it was to, make sure that we hit the new cadets. This was in early 2018 when JSO was funded to hire like 350 new officers that year. So, get them while they're early, get them before they get out on the streets and, the challenges of the realities of being a sworn law enforcement officer kick in. So he asked me to meet with his chief of training and standards at the time, and we had a good one-on-one, and he told me to create a program, and so I did, and I piloted it at the JSO headquarters with 25 officers and staff members, and they really liked it. And a couple of weeks later, I got a call, and I was asked to weave together the immigration program that Andrea and I did, as well as the initial community policing program. So we were combining kind of 4.5 hours of stuff into 2 hours, but they wanted to make that part of the academy. So all cadets go through that within their first couple of days. We get 2 hours, and so what I want to do now is just we're going to both take you through some highlights of the program. So, you can read the objective on the screen faster than I can, but that's what we put up after the video that you all saw. So it's really about, if we don't all, in whatever role we're at, chances are pretty good we're going to be working, serving, whatever you want to call it, people that we may not have a lot of personal life experience with. And so how can we get that as a concept and know, learn to know what we don't know? Because in 2 hours, we're not going to teach everyone about every culture on the planet, much less enough about unconscious or implicit biases. So the agenda, we actually have them do some introductions. We talk about individual identity. So it's important to understand the things that are important to an individual. And we do an exercise where I ask them, we brainstorm what are some ways that we're different than each other. And of course, the obvious ones are race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion. But then there's a bunch of stuff that is below the surface. Things like socioeconomic background, parental status, values, hobbies, education. You don't see that stuff, right? And we do a practice with, I pick a couple of names, and we do like Rick Scott. So what do you think Rick Scott would use to identify him? What is important in his own identity? You do Shad Khan, RuPaul, Sonia Sotomayor, and then I asked the cadets to do, come up with 3 things that are important to their identity, and then we all go around and share. There's a lot of common themes, even though, I've been really blown away at the diversity, the gender and ethnic diversity that's coming into the academy, but they more or less talk about the same things: family, values, profession, things that are so much commonality. But then we also talk about how others see us, and because most of the things that are important to us are below the surface, we don't get to see that. and then we weave in the assumptions conversation to that. Then we talk about some of the basics of community policing. So why is it important? What are some basic facts? We do this, this picture above the agenda is an exercise that I learned in the restaurant business called the greeting mill. And it just demonstrates how easy it is to make a connection with someone that costs nothing, that has zero cost to what you might otherwise do. And they really get a kick out of that. Obviously, with social distancing, we can't really do that one now, but that's a really impactful one. Then we go into a really brief exercise to depict how easy it is to stereotype. And I'm going to show you a little bit about that one. So what I do is I'll flash this picture up for like 10 seconds, and I'll say, count how many items of purple there are in the picture. But then I'll pop up, there's a total of 6 questions that I'll pop up that have nothing to do with purple. And then at the end, after I go through all that, we go back and see how many of the 6 they got right. Usually, at most, it's like 3 or 4. Only one time did someone get all 6 right, and I lost $20 because I offered that up as a prize if anyone got it right. It turns out the cadet had done that same exercise in the military. So then we talk about, well, why aren't we able to answer these questions? And I said, because I created a filter in your mind and put a time limit on it. And so that's what happens in real life. And stereotypes are a filter, because when we only see what's on the surface, that's when our unconscious biases kick in that teach us to look for specific characteristics. When I said purple, that's all you went and looked at. You didn't look to see what item was on the table. You didn't look at the whole picture. So that's a pretty impactful exercise. And then that allows us to start talking about just the theory of unconscious bias or implicit bias, which you've all probably heard of, and how that really starts from the time we're out of the womb, because our brain is a pattern-seeking organism. It's trying to figure out the world. Our brain exists for 2 reasons: to minimize threats and maximize rewards for us as individuals. And so our brain is trying to categorize things that we can use to infer when we don't have full information. So we get into a little bit of a theory of unconscious bias. Then we bring in 3 members of the community to talk about their specific demographic, and I'm going to ask Andrea to share those with you.
Right. So after Samir goes over these different concepts, then there are 3 specific community members that talk about the distrust of vulnerable populations, specifically LGBTQ, African Americans, and Hispanic communities. Each community member gets about 15 minutes, and we engage with the cadets. We ask them questions. We try to keep them engaged so it's not, a monologue where we're just up there talking. And they're usually pretty responsive. So first up is Dan Merkin. He is the brilliant director of policy at Jasmine. And as part of the LGBT community, Dan introduces his pronouns, him, his, he, him, and his. So specifically, we're not going to go into the actual presentation for each one of us, but there are underlying themes. And it's who is the LGBTQ community of Duval. We talk about the common concerns of the LGBTQ individuals, such as higher substance use rates, depression, suicide, isolation. And then we talk about the common negative outcomes of what happens when an LGBTQ person has been overwhelmed by the concerns that they face, such as like I said, depression and isolation. So at the end of each member, at the end of their presentation, does an ask, right? And we ask the cadets, how can you protect and better serve the LGBTQ persons? And we basically try to give them some examples of what they can better do to serve that specific community. After Dan, then we have attorney Leslie Scott Gimbart. She is a mother, a wife, an attorney, and a change agent. And so she starts off a little bit different. We start off the conversation with a little bit of civil rights imagery. And right off the bat, we, especially now, right, we have this conversation that that the historical basis for negative minority community perceptions of police in America cannot and should not be ignored. We talk about slave patrols attacking civil rights protesters, the war on drugs, the stop and frisk law. And so how those things have created massive concerns for the African American community. And so then she goes into the specifics of those common concerns. And again, at the end, there is an ask, right? How can I protect and serve African Americans? And in that conversation, right, we talk about don't fear us, right? We're not all the same. Seek to understand us and view us as human beings. And so after attorney Leslie Scott-Jean-Bart finishes her section, then I go into the Hispanic community dialogue, which is very much the same structure. It's, who makes up the Hispanic Latino community in Jacksonville. So we go into actual specific demographics. We talk about Hispanic versus Latino. We talk about some misconceptions about how all immigrants, all Hispanics are immigrants and not all immigrants are Hispanics, not all Spanish speaking, not all immigrants from South America speak Spanish, right? Jacksonville has a huge Brazilian population that speaks Portuguese. So we kind of go into some of those details. We talk about Hispanic culture and how rapport is very important. Immigrants and specifically Hispanics like to get to know you first before they do business with you. So community policing is a huge a positive way that we encourage the cadets to protect and serve the Hispanic population. But so it's a similar structure of who we are, what are our concerns, and how can you help us? And so we try to provide information. And for, of course, the Hispanic, I work very closely as an immigration attorney. I work very closely with what's called the International Affairs Unit. Here, Jacksonville Sheriff's Office has this unit that specifically helps different immigrant communities all across the city, and specifically has a program called the U Visa program, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's a program for victims of crime, specific qualifying crimes. And so we let them know, like, the International Affairs Unit is your friend. Seek them out, especially if you're trying to get information from a witness or a victim who might be afraid to talk to you because, again, some of those concerns. And one of the things that I specifically talk about as a concern for Hispanic populations is the inherent distrust of law enforcement due to the extensive history of law enforcement corruption in our home countries. Central America and Latin America have been plagued by government corruption for decades. And so we try to establish that as one of the concerns that they face. And so after that conversation, we go into, I dive into basically a little bit of that immigrant experience that we had in the Lunch and Learn. We go into the demographics of, in Florida and then specifically in Jacksonville to give them a little bit more facts. And I think at the end of my presentation, we also do what's called the Mythbusters. So we go over some terminology that's very common today. So for example, what is DACA? What is chain migration? What is illegal alien? Undocumented immigrant? And so we try to have them think a little bit about these things and what it means to them, and they're usually pretty receptive. We've definitely had a little bit of pushback on some of the concepts, but it's normal, and we welcome the engagement because that's how change happens.
Great. So before I get into the conclusion for We Are Duval, I do share some stats about the demographics overall. That 2015 stats that Duval was about 60% white, 40% non-white. We do the gender stats. And then we also, talk about that the per capita income's a little bit poorer or more poor than the national average, that there's a higher percentage of households without vehicles registered, just some things that would be helpful, but maybe not as obvious. But we don't want to end with statistics, because statistics don't change hearts and minds. What I try to do is tell some stories that maybe would inspire the cadets to think about what they do every day, because the reality is law enforcement officers have a lot of discretion, right? I mean, I can honestly say I don't think I've driven the speed limit less than 5% of the time that I've driven. I mean, I'm not doubling it, but I've, you know, not touch wood, not been pulled over much. And so just a small example, but a law enforcement officer can ignore something. They can have a lecture, give you a lecture about something. They can write your ticket. They can arrest you, or, you know, in some small cases, things get really out of control and there's fatalities. And so the range of discretion is wide. So I tell 3 stories that, you know, that were in the mainstream news. We don't hear about a lot of these examples, unfortunately, but there's a lot more of them out there. So I talk about, you know, in Birmingham, Alabama, an African-American man was found just sitting on the side of the road at 4 a.m. When 2 white police officers stopped by. And that could have gone a lot of different ways, but it turned out he was on his way to work and his car wasn't working. There was no bus service at that time of the morning, so he was walking 10 miles to work. After 7 miles, he got tired and is laying on the side of the road. So the officers could have arrested him, they could have ticketed him, but instead they took him to breakfast, they took him to a 24-hour Walmart, got him a new pair of shoes, and they took him to work. Went viral, built a huge amount of credibility for that whole police department. Same thing in Kansas, an officer was called to a little bodega, and a grandmotherly type was going to get arrested for shoplifting a carton of eggs. Well, it turns out that she was looking after the kids of her opioid addicted daughter, and she didn't have a lot of money, so she was stealing eggs, you know, a la Les Miserables, to put food on their table. And instead of arresting her, the officer convinced the shop owner to let him pay for, the officer to pay for not just the eggs, but a bunch of groceries, and he took her home. Same thing, I can't remember where this one was, but, you know, someone was pulled over, turned out they had driving with a suspended license, which, you know, we know in Florida leads to a lot of arrests, but wherever this was, instead, the guy was actually going to the driver's license office, so the officer took him there, helped him get his driver's license, and actually took him to work. So then, it, you know, a little bit of a rhetorical question, but how do we make this part of the JSO culture? So that's what we end with. Is it having an impact? Can't say for sure, but here's what I can tell you for sure. So we've probably taken 500 cadets through this since mid-2018. We did a session a couple of weeks ago and have our next session in August, so they're continuing to go on. In the first year and a half, I was doing evaluations where I would hand out index cards and ask them to rate from 1 to 5, 1 being ineffective, 5 being very effective, and then give us suggestions to make it better under the auspices of continuous improvement. And while we were doing the measure, we were always averaging over a 4.0. And of all the evaluations we ever got, we only had 2 that were less than a 3. Lots of 4s and 5s. Go ahead.
We also asked them to, like, the suggestions on the back of their rate. We often got really great you know, comments like, I did not know this, or I learned this, or now I understand this better. So I mean, they actually provided a lot of positive feedback in that first year and a half.
Yep. Anecdotal feedback. So I have run into probably about a half dozen individual JSO officers who remembered the training. I wasn't getting arrested or anything, but just in seeing me around in Jacksonville or Duval County, just mentioning, hey, I remember you from the training, really made a difference. Thank you for doing that. Waking up to this headline last year was very heartwarming. This is the LGBTQ community kind of commenting about JSO's approach. And there's a lot of things that went into this, including their liaison team, including a program on transgender awareness that I helped them put into place. But, you know, we think that what we did was seen through this. And last but not least, we were asked to be part of a human rights panel at a TEDx to speak about this work. So I don't know, is it having an impact? Hopefully, even if it's one officer that may do something different than we know it's made a difference. So as we're, we'd planned to speak for about 40 minutes, so we're about 5 minutes away. I wanted to talk to you, give you some suggestions. So I've been involved in, through my corporate life, running a couple small businesses, lots of nonprofit work. One of the common themes is I've always been in and around change, and I've picked up some things that have helped me achieve impactful change in those contexts. I want to run through these real quickly. I am going to be presenting a course on this at some stage before Labor Day, so if you're interested, shoot me an email and I'll make sure you know about it. But a lot of this is rooted in kind of how hardwired our brain is, which is pretty darn hardwired, believe it or not. We don't really concertedly control our reactions unless we're methodical about it. So the first one actually comes from some training that I got licensed to be a foster parent, and in my training for that, I love this. This is a different context for other models that I've heard, but this relates to how we try to influence people, whether it's a teenager or a decision maker. And it basically says, unless you are regulated, you cannot get to a point where you can have a conversation about reason. So we have three parts of our brain. We have the lizard part, which is the amygdala. We have the mammal part, and we have the human part. We want to make decisions in the human part. That's the reasoning. But if we are emotionally charged, and if the other person is, we're in the amygdala. We cannot make decisions. We can't get to a point that we're having a reasonable conversation where we're using facts and information to try to convince someone. So you have to regulate yourself first, bring the other person down from an elevated state, find a way to relate to them personally. There's always a way to find a connection with someone so they understand that you are like them in some way, shape, or form, and then you can actually reason with them. The next concept I call 2 ears or one mouth. So whether you believe in creation or evolution, God or Darwin gave us 2 ears and one mouth, not 1 ear and two mouths. So if we listen twice as much as we speak, we'll be able to get that connection with someone. Said differently, this is a Stephen Coveyism. He's one of my favorites. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. This next one is not a complicated math formula. It's a formula for change. So unfortunately, there's crazy people like me that love change and change stuff all the time, but most people don't like change. So R is the resistance to change. If you want to overcome someone's resistance to change, you have to start by creating a sense of dissatisfaction. If they don't feel dissatisfaction, there'll be no opportunity to overcome resistance to change. But dissatisfaction is not to have a vision for the future. That's the V. And then the F is the first step. So what's one step to get to that vision? So that's why changes don't happen that easily, because to overcome resistance, you have to create dissatisfaction, have a vision, and then a first step. But that dissatisfaction, that can't be your dissatisfaction. It has to be theirs. And so when I say go to where they are, this is from Pope Francis. And when he says go to where the people are, if you want to get people to change, you have to go to them, whether it's physically, mentally, or emotionally. You've got to put the dissatisfaction in a way that's relevant and resonant with them, because they may not care about what you care about. They may have a totally different worldview or different needs or whatever. The next thing is when you're trying to communicate change, we usually talk about what we want to see differently and how to get there, but we rarely talk about the why, and the why is the most important part. If you remember from school, there's that bell curve, right? So a lot of the grades that you got were on the bell curve, where it's big in the middle and there's two ends on the tail. Well, if you're on the side of change, you're usually on one end or the other. On the opposite end are the people that have no interest in changing, no matter what you do or say. But guess where we end up spending most of our time, our physical and emotional time, is trying to change the people on the far end. Right smack in the middle is most of the population that you want to convince. Start chipping away there. That's what's called the movable middle. We talked a little bit about icebergs earlier when it came to identity, that when most of the person's identity is under the surface, all we see is what's on top. It's the same thing with change, right? So when we're trying to get through to people, a lot of the barriers are under the surface. A lot of the barriers are political. So not necessarily Democrat, Republican, but they're in the way organizations work, who gets to make the decisions. You don't necessarily see that right out of the gate. There's a Rolling Stones song that has a lyric, "You can't always get what you want." I'm not going to sing it because my voice is terrible, but if you try, you might get what you need. So when we went in to see Sheriff Williams, we wanted him to opt out of the 287G program that his predecessor, now Congressman Rutherford and formerly Sheriff Rutherford, started with the Homeland Security Department. After several meetings, and he did actually consider maybe modifying the agreement, but was really unable to do that, which I don't disagree with. But once it was clear that we weren't going to get that, a lot of times what happens with change in the social justice world is it's all or nothing. So instead of just walking away, we said, all right, so what are we really trying to achieve? When earlier I talked about how much discretion officers have. If we can create some empathy for why people immigrate to America, why they stay, all that they give up, maybe that will activate a different level of discretion. So we didn't necessarily get Sheriff Williams to opt out of 287G or even to modify the agreement where it might only be applied for violent crimes. But what we did get is the chance to sit in front of 500 cadets and try to create a sense of empathy about immigrants and immigration.
And Samir, if I can butt in, as you said, right, we started off with a really big ask, which was opt out entirely of 287G. And we tried to negotiate some modifications, didn't come back. And so what we realized, right, when we had the conversation about what is it that we're trying to accomplish, it became very clear, right? JSO was essentially operating the same way. What had happened, what had changed, was the immigration policies because of the election. So if you all remember, right, Trump took over and right in February of 2017, travel ban, immigration changes. It was immediately all these policy changes. So we started seeing an influx of ICE raids and arrests happening, where immigrant families were calling, desperately looking for their family members. And so we knew that that something had happened, and that JSO, because of 287G, was directly involved with this process, and we were trying to get them to consider opting out of it. So like as Samir said, right, when we really talked about what was happening, what we were looking for, it was to try to, soften the heartstrings of JSO a little bit, because JSO was still doing the same. What had changed were the immigration policies. There were no longer priorities. ICE no longer had priorities to focus on to deport certain immigrants. It was just basically everybody at that point became deportable based on the executive orders that the administration created. So it was really interesting that those first 6 months of the program were very interesting to see how we quickly had to adapt and modify and adjust to the changes.
Yeah. And then last but not least, once you get the opportunity, you got to execute the heck out of whatever you're doing. So that means have your act together, make sure you know your roles, you practice, whether it's for the meetings or the actual trainer, or whatever you're trying to change, executional excellence gets you the credibility to go on to the next thing. So I know we're a little bit over. I just wanted to close with the starfish story that many of you probably already know, but if you don't, it's a parable that, a family was walking to dinner on the beach, and there was a husband, wife, daughter, son. The daughter was way behind, and so the family turned back around to go back and see what the heck she was doing, and they saw these starfish on the beach. She was throwing them in one by one, and the dad was like, "Oh, honey, that's so sweet, but you can't save them all." And what she said was, "No, but I can save one at a time." And when you think about change, and this came up in my Facebook memories a couple days ago. I was doing a speech on voting rights and voter suppression 2 years ago, and one of the ladies in the audience asked me, she was African American, and talked about her, how can I make sure her son is safe? And I'm saying I'm going to do my best, one officer at a time. So thank you for being on this call and being the change you want to see in the world. These are our email addresses. And I think we still have, sorry, we went about 5 minutes over, but we still have 15 minutes for questions.
Thank you so much, Andrea and Samir, for this useful and very informative presentation. I really enjoyed finally being able to learn about this program that you guys have been running. And I think there were also some really good pieces on these ideas and the theories behind change. So I really appreciate all that you guys prepared and presented. We do have some questions from the audience, so I'll just go in the order that they were received. First of all, what issues or topics usually have the most pushback? What ideas are they least receptive to?
The one that has the most, I don't want to say pushback, but more of a plea of, are you doing this in the community? So are you trying to build empathy in the community for the plight and the challenge of law enforcement officers? And, I got the opportunity to do the FBI Citizens Academy, and part of that was doing the training simulator, where you have a mock Glock that's got a laser on it, and there's all these different scenarios going on. And I mean, my heart rate was that was a simulator, but my heart rate was 140. And I don't know what if you believe what you see in the movies, but that doesn't exist. I mean, I do go to the gun range often, and I'm pretty good at the gun range, but I could not hit anything that I was supposed to be hitting when under that kind of duress. And so, whether it's, that kind of empathy, or all the mental health issues that exist out there, the fact that, police officers are being put in a position to kind of enforce or fix all of societal challenges. So that's what we get a lot of pushback questions. Can you do something with the rest of the community so that we're not all portrayed as villains?
And the community chats, I think the one that probably gets the most pushback is when we go into the myths about undocumented immigrants versus illegal aliens. And we've actually had a couple people just say, "You're not going to tell me how to use the word. You're not going to convince me otherwise." In one of the earlier trainings, we actually had somebody stand up and kind of just leave to cool off, because it wasn't like a heated conversation, but they just weren't comfortable with the idea. And so the way that I come at it, right, is when a underage child is driving a car, and he gets pulled over, and the police officer goes to arrest him, or the way that he talks to the child is not, you're an illegal driver, right? The name is, you are an unlicensed driver. And so that's kind of the starting point that we use. Like their crime is not, like, they're not illegal. No human being can be illegal, right? It's their action of being undocumented that makes them undocumented. And so that's always kind of been, like, not always, but in some of the conversations that we've had, there's definitely been like it's the same, or they're here illegally. So, and especially because for the past 4 years, immigration has been so contentious and polarized. So I at this point, I kind of expect it.
Were there particular ideas that you thought was most receptive to the people, to the trainees?
When we did the evaluations, the one that I think probably got the most frequent citations. So one of the things that we did early on was have them share a key takeaway. I use there's a psychological concept called the 7-11 rule, and that basically says in the first 7 seconds of meeting someone, you're going to make 11 judgments. Those aren't first impressions, but those are deep-rooted judgments. And so that's one that stands out that people really like, because you can remember that. And it's like, trying not to, those judgments are going to happen, but it doesn't mean they have to prevail. You just have to be really deliberative about it. So there was a number of the cadets that cited that as they're going to try to, knowing that that's going to happen, they're going to overcome that. Unconscious bias exists. It doesn't have to rule us. We just have to rewrite the software.
Andrea, did you have anything to add to that?
I think it's been, having the 3 different community dialogues is, I think for them, very educational. They tend to be very receptive. We start off with in my section, right, I'll do the Hispanic, who's here gone to a Hispanic party and not taken, 20 minutes to say hi to everybody and 20 minutes to say bye to everyone, right? Because the hugs and the kisses and the friendliness and the warmth. And so, we keep them engaged. I think that's been really positive. And again, there's 3 of the main communities, but there's obviously so much more in Jacksonville. But it's always been a positive response when we talk about the community dialogues. Oh, and they also really like the community policing. That it's one of my favorites. I love it because their reactions are always really funny. We do this thing where Samir does a very dry walk where there's no communication, and then there is a dry walk with a head nod, and then there's a walk with a complete greeting, and it's you see their responses, and they end up laughing, and it's just interesting to see how they respond to it.
Great. I think we can move on to the next question we have here. People can learn new information and yet continue with their beliefs and behaviors that they have deeply on their system. Have you done any follow-up after the training?
So that's one of the asks that we've had, and I'm not giving up on. Training in and of itself does not change anything. The analogy that I use is, and I used to be a partner in a chain of Gold's gyms, and so I know the fitness business really well. The busiest day and I use this analogy with them, that I ask them, what's the busiest day? And a lot of them say January 1st. I said, no, everyone's hungover. It's January 2nd. So a bunch of people come in, they get personal training sessions. But if that's the one thing you do and expect to be stronger, skinnier, faster, greater lung capacity, more flexibility, it doesn't happen. It's the same, you can't turn on Duolingo and learn Spanish in one sitting. It's repetition. You've got to build the muscle. So we will continue to use the in that we have to work with Sheriff Williams to try to get more ongoing follow-up, because that's the only way to actually rewire the software, reprogram the software.
Andrea, did you have anything to say about this?
I agree 100% with what Mayra Martelo says. It's the training itself is not going to create any immediate change. Mm-hmm. This is the point of this is exposure, right? It's not about necessarily impact, because we're not in a position to help JSO create that impact. It's about the exposure of the information. We provide resources in there, for the LGBT community, for the Hispanic community. We provide actual access to resources. So the idea is, to let them know, you're coming into this new field. We understand it's stressful, but here are these tools to help you if and when you find yourself with one of these, a member of this vulnerable population. And so, the takeaway, right? A lot of times these cadets don't even know that there is an international affairs unit. They don't know what a U visa program is. So just the fact that they're walking away with that, knowing that if in the future they engage with any type of immigrant, right, that maybe doesn't speak English, or doesn't, is scared to talk to the police because of, any kind of immigration consequences, then, the fact that they're walking away with this knowledge it's a small, it's a small change for us, but it's really hard to measure this change until we have this follow-up that Samir is looking, trying to work to get with the sheriff. We won't actually know the impact of this. But what I personally find to be very hopeful, I guess, maybe it's naive of me, but we talk about unconscious bias, and one of the things that we've talked as a community to do is more robust trainings on unconscious and explicit bias. So having already this program, having this, we basically have our foot in the door with this program, and so now we're going to be able to hopefully build on this for future programs. Specifically perhaps for police brutality and things like that, that I know Samir and I know Leslie, the attorney, Leslie has also been working on. So it's exciting to see what it could potentially lead to. But I don't disagree with you, Maida. I mean, it's true. It's really hard to get rid of those habits.
Moving on to the next question, we have one from Silvana from ACLU of Florida. What are your thoughts on engaging with sheriffs, police departments, and local communities in support of immigrants since SB 168 became law in Duval County and elsewhere?
So, I mean, I'll speak to this at first. So because Jacksonville already participated in the 287G program, the program, right, the SB 168 requires all the government officials, state agencies, and police departments to honor ICE detainers, or ICE holds, what they're called, for any person that's being held in custody. Well, here in Jacksonville, that's been the story since essentially 2008, when, as Samir mentioned, the former sheriff, now Congressman Rutherford, brought the program to Jacksonville. So for us, really we haven't seen, we've seen some issues in detention centers locally here, but in terms of the changes because of SB 168, we were already doing the ICE detainers. In terms of the engaging the police, so locally, I feel like this is probably one of the most effective programs that we've been able to establish so far with JSO. I know that JSO has had conversations with different minority organizations. They're also involved with the faith groups in Jacksonville. But it's really complicated, right? Because the SB 168 completely ruined, right, the trust that a lot of communities had established and created, made sanctuary cities that don't exist in the state of Florida, illegal essentially. And so here in Duval County, again, we haven't seen a whole lot, but I think this is a really good step forward to allow our communities to be heard and bring forward these very important vulnerabilities that they experience to JSO. I don't know, Samir, if you want to add to that.
I think that's right. I mean, we're and that's one of the reasons we put our email addresses up here. We'd love to get more involved with other law enforcement agencies, whether it's community policing or the immigrant experience or unconscious bias training. So reach out to us if you have an opportunity that you want us to look at.
Okay, thank you so much for all that, for the answer. The question was also something that has been sticking with me, so I appreciate that. Another question is, for a better future of immigration in Florida in the next 10 years, what do you think is most important in bringing about the change?
I'll take a first crack at that. I think so the business community has a majorly vested interest in ensuring a flow of good talent at whatever level of the organization. And I think they have been, in the past, they've been active. When I worked in corporate, I did some lobbying on Capitol Hill and in Tallahassee for exactly that. But I think getting them more engaged because, you know, they have a lot of the connections with the decision makers. They have a lot of the influence. And so really, you know, I know it's the activist community and the business community generally don't do a lot of work together. But again, this gets back to one of the concepts I shared earlier. There's going to be common ground out there. And so if you can put aside the differences you may have in other topics to work together on this one, to me, that's the key to success.
Andrea, did you have anything to say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I think these programs are not, they're about providing information and resources to a lot of the cadets. The impact is really an approach that has to come from all sides, right? It has to come from law enforcement, it has to come from the community, it has to come from the advocates, and it has to come, you know, wholeheartedly. And I think a really good example of what that change looks like is exactly how this program was created. We started with a really big ask. We tried to negotiate, no, right? We kept getting no, but we didn't give up. We talked about what it was that we were trying to accomplish, why we were concerned about JSO practices. And as a result of that, you know, yes, it was a baby step, but we are now, 2.5 years into the program. It's a curriculum. And while, you know, not every police officer is going to remember everything that we said there, you know, we are confident, especially because of the evaluations that we were getting, that they walked away with something important and meaningful from that presentation. It's a 2-hour packed presentation of a lot of useful information. And, you know, our experience so far has been that they have been very receptive to it. So it's not going to happen overnight. And I think that's what Samir said. It's going to take, you know, the activist community to join sides and the law enforcement community to, again, be willing to listen.
Great. We actually had a lot of questions, so I have some more here. I hope you guys have some time for that. Would you be able to share the information on the terminology training with the audience, or maybe some of the individuals that may be interested, or would that be something that they would have to email you guys for?
That's fine. Email would probably be better.
Yeah. Okay. So for those of you who want to get more information on the terminology training that they had in the program, that you guys are welcome to contact Samir and Andrea for more information. Okay. I think this will be our last question. Do you think all officers can learn from this, or are there some bad apples who are too resistant? If so, should they remain on the police force? What are your thoughts on that?
So actually, I just responded to I typed an answer, but I'll share what I think I typed. I do think that all officers should go through something like this. All officers won't respond to it because some of them are bringing different life experiences. I do think that the vast majority, 95 to 99% want to do the right thing, the right way for the right reason. School, there has to be a process to weed out individuals that don't want to follow the process and products, that are unwilling or unable to serve and protect equally and fairly. Then there should be a transparent, fair and accountable process to make those decisions.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think both are possible. Like I said, we've had really positive experiences already with the cadets walking away very receptive. But we know that not all of them are going to think the same way about immigrants, and not all of them are going to think the same way about African Americans or the LGBTQ community. But I came across a quote that I'll share with you guys, and I think it really fits the situation. So, and the experience, right, that we want them to walk away with at the end of the day, right, what we want them to remember is that in order to empathize with someone's experience, they must be willing to believe them as they see it and not how they imagine their experience to be. Brene Brown wrote that. And really, right, the idea, and that's when we talk about personal identity and our backgrounds and how we identify ourselves and how the world views us, because that's all going to be the filters that lead them to their perceptions. And so if we can just help them understand that, there has to be an intention to want to understand, then I think, we've made a little bit of progress with the program.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for our brilliant speakers for taking your time to give this informative webinar. Again, I learned a lot, and thank you so much for all the great answers to the questions. I would like to use this opportunity to thank our sponsors who have made this program possible: Islamic Relief USA, Welcome in Gainesville, ACLU Florida, Reyes Legal PLC, Mubarak Law, Engage, Florida Immigrant Coalition, We Are America, Welcome America, CARE Florida, the Law Office of Karen Winston, and this week, Women's March Jacksonville also joined us, and Southern Private Law Center, University of Florida, Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, and Gators for Refugee Medical Relief. Thank you all so much for the support. Now, before you leave the meeting, please answer the poll if you haven't. We did launch 2 polls today just to see how you guys are doing and to get some feedback on the webinar. So if you can answer it, it will be highly appreciated. And also consider joining us for our next webinar next Friday at noon. That will be led by the Trust Coalition of Orlando. We'll be speaking about their 18-month journey of accomplishing the Trust Act for the city of Orlando and Kissimmee. You can sign up for the next webinar at forwardtogetherfl.eventbrite.com. Now, thank you everyone so much for tuning in, and for our panelists, I hope you all have a great weekend, and I'll see you next Friday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samira and Andrea. Appreciate it.